Welcome back to the show, everyone. Hit the like button as you come on. I am live. I just touched down in Beijing, not just hours ago, but I wanted to come back live. I've been on a plane for 19 hours plus, and I've just caught up on the latest developments. So I want to catch all you up if you haven't been following, and if you have, I want to analyze what's been going on, especially around Iran. So hit the like button as you come on. Let's get started. Everyone, if you can, do an audio check, camera check. This is a whole new setup as well. So just want to make sure everything is going all smoothly. Let's start right away, though, because as talks were happening, we just had 21 hours at least of talks between the United States and Iran in Islamabad, mediated by Pakistan. They have completely fallen apart. They have collapsed. They're over. JD Vance has left. The Iranians have left. Neither of them say that talks are going to continue at any point in the future. But as this was happening, the United States was escalating. This is why I say the US is not just agreement incapable, it is actually just a pariah state. It is an empire. It is an empire pariah state seeking to exert dominance. It is not interested in peace or even a pause. No, it is simply seeking to gain any leverage it can in a losing situation. And that's where we actually are. So Press TV reported this because even as these talks were going on 21 hours, in the middle of them, what did the United States do? It tried to send U.S. destroyers, two of them actually. This is only reporting on one, I believe, but Press TV reported that a U.S. Navy attempt to send two destroyers, no, two actually, through the Strait of Hormuz on Saturday ended in failure after Iranian forces intervened. According to the report, the USS Michael Murphy and the USS Frankie Peterson attempted a high-risk transit but were detected and intercepted by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps naval units. That same Navy, everyone, that we've heard is gone. It's destroyed. No, actually, it is still very much here. So the investigation says the ships use electronic warfare tactics and false identification to appear as commercial vessels from Oman while navigating close to the shore through shallow waters. Iranian forces identified the deception early and moved to block passage. Press TV, this is Iranian media, says Iranian cruise missiles locked onto the vessels in drones and they were deployed overhead with a warning given to the ships that they had 30 minutes to withdraw or face this attacks, and then the ships reversed course. This was during negotiations, okay? And it's not just Iranian media that said this was happening. It's also Bloomberg. So here's the Bloomberg report. Two U.S. Navy Arleigh Burke-class destroyers attempted to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, but were forced to turn back after the REGC threatened to launch a drone in their direction. This was from Bloomberg, and this is actually the report here. You can see it here from regional intelligence, according to the Bloomberg magazine. So 21 hours of talks, everyone. 21 hours of talks. And this is how the United States was behaving during them. And that is even to get to the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu called JD Vance in the middle of the talks, according to Iran, according to Abbas Arachi, that it derailed the talks. This was a game. Netanyahu called, said, hey, don't do any of this. Make sure that you are following me and you are following Israel. All of this is all a good cop, bad cop. The truth is that JD Vance, the U.S. delegation, as Mohammed Marandi said, friend of this show, said he was in Islamabad. He said straight up, the Iranians were prepared for the U.S. to come in, not prepared to actually negotiate at all. What were they there to do? They were there to essentially buy time. They were there to try to gain any kind of leverage, to try to jump off the next phase of the war and ease market tensions. There are all sorts of factors why the United States was involved in negotiations, but nonetheless, it wasn't for peace. It was all for U.S. priorities and interests, which are, of course, inherently anti-Iranian. But so the talks collapsed, and you had this major confrontation between the U.S. and Iran in the Strait of Hormuz. Well, this confrontation led to the United States having to retreat. So you think, well, the United States learned its lesson. It is not going to continue to do this. Hell, you even had the New York Times. I don't know if you saw that report just a few days ago. The New York Times said that U.S. officials are reporting that Iran can't even demine its own sea mines that it has laid. So that means the Strait of Hormuz is going to be closed for the foreseeable future. And a lot of people were saying that this is simply an admission that the US is trying to find a way to justify the fact that it cannot reopen the strait. Really, it cannot reassert control over the Strait of Hormuz. Nonetheless, we're supposed to believe that Iran is stupid, weak, that it laid down these sea mines in a haphazard way. So that's why it has to escort ships. No, it did it in a very strategic way, and it did it to defend itself from US naval incursions, because the very beginning of this war, before the first strike started, was characterized by a naval buildup that hasn't really worked out very well. If you look at where the USS Gerald Ford is now in Crete, getting repairs that are going to take 12 to 14 months. Why? Well, Iranians say it's because they fired at them, and the US Navy is saying that it's because of a big laundry fire after the big plumbing scandal, after the big SHIT gate that they had, where they had plumbing just absolutely going berserk and crazy inside of the Gerald Ford, clogged toilets and shirts being found in the pipes. After that, a big laundry fire took out the USS Ford for a year or more from operation. Now you have the USS George W. Bush on the way to replace it. But you would think the US has learned its lesson from this, that its naval power is not where it should be, not where it can, not where it ever will be, because it can't really improve for reasons we've gone over in this show. But has the United States learned its lesson? No. Even after it was forced to retreat, this is Donald Trump now. This is the latest threat, that the US Navy will start blockading the Strait of Hormuz. Well, isn't that interesting? The United States now is saying, under Trump, it's going to blockade. So there you have it. The meeting went well. Most points were agreed to, but the only point that really mattered, nuclear, was not. Effective immediately, the United States Navy, the finest in the world, will begin the process of blockading any and all ships trying to enter or leave the Strait of Hormuz. At some point, we will reach an all being allowed to go in, all being allowed to go out basis, but Iran has not allowed that to happen by merely saying, there may be a mine out there somewhere that nobody knows about but them. This is world extortion. And leaders of countries, especially the United States of America, will never be extorted. I have also instructed our Navy to seek and interdict every vessel in international waters that has paid a toll to Iran. No one who pays an illegal toll will have safe passage on the high seas. So this is what Donald Trump is proposing. Donald Trump is proposing to fight a blockade. The United States Navy will fight a so-called blockade, which it isn't, but to fight a blockade with an actual blockade, to interdict and stop shipping that is doing business with Iran, because Iran has effectively asserted control of the Strait of Hormuz, that waterway that lies along its territory, as well as Oman's. It is now charging a toll in RMB, cryptocurrency, etc., based on its own sovereign right to do so, right? The people have to remember, the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas is actually not signed by a lot of countries, including the United States, which champions it all the time, is freedom of navigation, but it never signed it. And the reason for this is because territorial waterways are actually really difficult to internationalize, because a lot of them fall by territorial waterways. So you get into questions of sovereignty that are very challenging to deal with through international bodies. And this is why it is absolutely ridiculous that Donald Trump is claiming to want to blockade now the Strait of Hormuz in the midst of what Iran is doing, which is simply asserting control over it, because it is saying that's its sovereign right. And it has a reason to, under the laws of war, under the law of war at the United Nations, international law, because it was attacked. Because it was attacked by the United States and Israel, foreign powers. And now, to be quite honest, the Strait of Hormuz is a war zone. We just saw it. So Donald Trump is saying he's going to blockade the Strait of Hormuz after his destroyers were sent back. And now they're going to do more of this, as if that's not going to have any consequences at all. This is the state of things right now for the United States. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it needs more attention. Because what's going to happen to the US when it tries to blockade ships from the Strait of Hormuz? Well, the RIGC said that's a miscalculation. We are going to respond, likely in the same way that they did to the destroyers that tried to interdict into the Strait of Hormuz this past Saturday. So So do you see where this is going? The war is effectively being restarted by the Trump administration. And why? Because it couldn't dictate terms to Iran. And here is the official statement of this blockade. So after failing to interdict anything in the Strait of Hormuz with 2 destroyers, now Trump says effectively immediately, the United States Navy, the finest in the world, will begin the process of blockading any and all ships trying to enter or leave the Strait of Hormuz. This will do wonders, I'm sure, for the markets. I'm sure this will do wonders for the oil markets, etc., for the global economy. After the whole reason for this 2-week pause for the ceasefire talks was what? The whole reason was to buy time for the United States to have the economic situation ease, have the markets breathe a sigh of relief that their interests are not going to be completely, literally blown up because the US is looking to essentially, as I've said before with friend Brian Berletic on this show, to destroy the whole um, chessboard. Forget the chessboard. Forget what Brzezinski said, right? The grand chessboard that is all about trying to divide and conquer and using the Cold War, etc., to do this in order to promote U.S. hegemony. No, that is actually gone. There is no more grand chessboard. They don't have any possibility to assert control over the chessboard anymore. China, Russia, and now Iran, the fourth global power, according to the New York Times, is ascendant. All of these countries are very much ascendant. So let's get to the statements of what the United States said after these talks. How about that? Here is JD Vance. Here's his statement. I'm not going to play it just for the sake of saving bandwidth here where I am. But it says the full statement from JD Vance following 21 hours of talks was such. We have not reached an agreement. I think that's bad news for Iran and more than it is for the United States. Vance says the U.S. made clear its red lines and what it would accommodate. Iran chose not to accept U.S. terms. The core issue being we need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon and will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon. He claims Iran's enrichment facilities have been destroyed, but says the U.S. hasn't seen a fundamental commitment or will for the Iranians not to develop a nuclear weapon, not just for now, not just from 2 years from now, but for the long term. Now, the question is, why would Iran capitulate to U.S. demands? Iran has asserted control over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is the reason why the U.S. was seeking peace talks 3 whole weeks, according to the Financial Times, before the ceasefire actually was instituted back in mid-March. The Trump administration was contacting Pakistan, contacting other mediators anywhere in the region that could get the ear of Iran to start facilitating these peace talks. So why then would why would Iran decide to back down? Well, the only reason that Iran decided to do this was to gain diplomatic capital, was to ensure and show the world that it is serious about de-escalation if it can be serious about de-escalation. If there's an opportunity to de-escalate, Iran is showing the world that it can. It's not allowing the U.S. to rebuild. Certainly not, because a 2-week ceasefire doesn't really allow anything to be rebuilt. You can't produce weapons that take years to produce and have them to Israel and the United States within a couple of weeks. That's just not how any of this works. So Iran knows this. Iran is using the clock, the proverbial clock of U.S. imperial decay toward its own advantage, and now it has just done this diplomatically. So that was JD Vance's commentary. Well, let's look at what Iran said, okay? Because what Iran said is also very important. The Iranian perspective is often not given any attention, but in times like these, when there's a war, you have to give it. So here's what Iranian state TV revealed about the reasons for the failure of the talks the U.S. tried to achieve at the negotiating table. This is what Abbas Araghchi literally said to the media. They tried to achieve at the negotiating table what it could not achieve through the war. The Americans demanded that Iran hand over rich uranium and open the Strait of Hormuz without recognizing Iran's sovereignty over them. Iran has decided to defend its national interests by military means. And What's really interesting about what Iran ultimately did is it said it was defending their gains at the negotiating table, which is a tactic in war. So one can look at these negotiations not simply as Iran trying to talk its way out of war or the US and Israel trying to talk their way out of war. Both of them were using negotiations as a tool for their own forms of warfare. For the United States and Israel, of course, it's about aggression. It's about gaining leverage for that, building legitimacy toward that, and maybe buying time, maybe buying some more favorable political atmosphere from which it can launch again. The Donald Trump administration, even Israel, they both like surprise and shock. So you even had people, I don't know if you saw this, making rumors about, and I don't think any of them are really substantiated, that the Israelis were going to kill the negotiating team, which would have had our friend Mohammed Marandi. He was there, right? So he was traveling with the negotiating team, and there were rumors that they were all going to be targeted by Israeli strikes, and this is why you had Pakistan sending out an military escort with Chinese fighter jets and various defense systems to escort them back to Bandar Abbas, I think it was, back to Iran. But nonetheless, it wasn't ever. I never saw any verification for this. It's hard to verify what the U.S. and Israel always tend to do in the moment, right? They don't tell you. They threaten, and many people think it's a bluff until they decapitate, and that's what they do. So it was a legitimate fear, but nonetheless, that is the environment, right? That is the environment that the United States and Israel want to dampen. They want to ensure that when they do these kind of attacks, it's under the auspices of, well, we tried to negotiate, right? And Iran was intransigent. Iran was not negotiating with us. So Iran is the reason for this failure. And that's what the United States is saying. And of course, Iran is saying the opposite. But the truth of the matter is that it's the United States that was ultimately negotiating from a position of weakness and ended up getting mad that a country that did not have to capitulate to them would not capitulate to them. And here is what Patricia Marin says, who's a very good geopolitical analyst, and she writes a lot on Twitter. But here are the 10 points explaining why Iran is not in a position to give in and why the U.S. seems to be living in a different reality. Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, and any attempt to take it would be extremely bloody and result in heavy casualties. As Iran warned today, as Iran demonstrated by turning back the 2 destroyers, it can close the other strait, that is the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, using the Houthis or Ansar Allah. And I would just put a caveat on it. It would be using the Houthis, Ansar Allah. Ansar Allah would be very much willing to do this in a very strategic manner to ensure that there is continuity in the resistance and that it strengthens not just Iran's position, but the position of the entire region. It has maintained a stable daily rate of missile and drone launches for several weeks, demonstrating his large arsenal. And now some of this is coming out. I've seen RT share it. I've seen others share it. For example, at the Ras Energy Hub in Qatar and other locations in Kuwait. The video is starting to come out. Remember, it was suppressed for a period of time by places like Planet Labs. You might remember Planet Labs said that it was going to censor for a period of time these images for national security reasons, aka for the United States' war effort. Now some of these videos are coming out, and it's very devastating. And a lot of these countries are seeing losses that are going to take months to years to rebuild if they ever are able to. So Iran's ground force is still intact and equipped with equipment and high morale, especially after the failure of Isfahan. Yes, that failure of the so-called F-15 rescue mission that was likely transformed, according to analysts I've had on this show, was transformed into a rescue mission. It was a rescue mission transformed from a ground operation that had gone horribly bad, that saw an Iranian ambush, which led to the destruction of those C-130s and many other aircraft like helicopters, etc., Chinooks. So it is Iran that is effectively sanctioning America with fuel prices and inflation already knocking at the door. It is Iran generating pressure on Trump from Gulf countries. It's Iran pressuring Trump from its Asian and European allies. Iran is well aware of the shortage of interceptors that Israel and the U.S. have and is actively exploiting that. Its air defense capabilities are gradually improving through the deployment of new equipment, showing that Iran has a long-term strategy. And I would agree with all of these points. Actually, I would say that they are undisputed. Iran has shown, and in those last days before the Trump administration called for the ceasefire, by downing the F-15, by showing what it could do during that attempted invasion at Isfahan, Iran demonstrated that it has air defense capabilities, which are not even, let's forget the technical part of it. They are strategically being utilized in a way that is causing the United States problems that it cannot tolerate for long periods of time. And it's likely that Iran does have the ability to do that for a long period of time. And with the JASSMs, according to Bloomberg, these long range standoff missiles that the F 15s, 18s, 35s that they're firing outside of Iranian air defense capabilities, those are about to run out. They are already depleted to such a degree that the US has had to admit it must gamble them all away in order to keep fighting this war against Iran. It's a disaster. I mean, this is an unmitigated disaster to a degree that I don't think anybody could have predicted when this war started. So the United States is looking for an out, but it's looking for an out that leads to it looking like it is in the driver's seat politically, that it can, um, I don't know what's going on there. So essentially, this is what the United States is trying to do. It is trying to use threats, to use intimidation, to claim to the world that it can actually get an outcome that it desires, when in fact, everything's already been proven. It's already been proven. And now the big question in the future will be, as this war begins again, because this is what this is. This is the beginning of a war. You can expect that the US will, at the very least, attempt to blockade ships around the Strait of Hormuz. I could see a very realistic scenario where ships come out of the Strait of Hormuz in transit elsewhere, and the US starts intercepting them from waters outside, right? Just like the USS Abraham Lincoln had to move outside of range of Iranian anti-ship missiles and ballistic missiles. I could see the United States in a scenario like this, following these tankers out of the Strait of Hormuz. Once they exit, then the US comes in, because it's likely that those parts aren't mined, because Iran can't mine every single part of the waters that the Strait of Hormuz flows into. And then there you have it. You have the confrontations. It's the Venezuela model, right? And this is the model that the Trump administration, Trump wants to repeat, because it's the only model that it can really apply. And the problem here is that Iran is not Venezuela. It's not. Venezuela, for all of its strength that it had politically in terms of the support that people have for that government, it was never ready militarily to fight the United States head on. And many people didn't think Iran was, until it happened. And here we are, until it happened, right? So the talks have collapsed, and the United States is where, predictably, for those who have watched this show, would have guessed they would be. The United States has pulled out of the talks. They were not ready to come to any kind of peace agreement. Some have said that maybe this is a tactic of the Trump administration to talk violently, to talk big, but then we'll actually be conducting talks from here on out. I don't think the Iranians trust the United States enough for that to be a viable option either. Because why would you give your adversary, why would you give the country, the empire, the imperialist apparatus, the war machine that has been unleashed upon you and unleashed upon your people? Remember, the Iranian delegation saved 160 plus seats in. They put not only the pictures of, I don't know what happened there. They put not only the images of the young girls who were killed in those horrific criminal genocidal war crime strikes by the United States to begin the war, but they also had the backpacks there, that they found. Right, there were remnants of the children that were incinerated by the tomahawks and the strikes against this school, the Manab school. And the Iranian delegation put out a statement saying that we are bringing them with us. So why would, after that, even just that one act, let alone the thousands upon thousands of civilian targeted strikes against infrastructure, against hospitals, schools, why would the Iranians give even just the United States an avenue to bluster? No. So this is why Iran is not going to talk unless there's a reason to talk. And the reason why there was talks in the first place is because Iran said, we're in the position of strength and we want to see where that can take us. So the situation only gets worse, though, because you have not only Iran repelling the strikes, right? You have Iran repelling the two naval destroyers that went into its territorial waters in the Strait of Hormuz. Not only have the peace talks collapsed, but now U.S. intelligence is sounding the alarm about China. Big shock. And Trump has already come out and said if China does this, then they're going to be in big trouble. Well, this is what U.S. intelligence is saying. They're saying that China is preparing weapons shipments to Iran amid a fragile ceasefire. U.S. intelligence, of course, takes this with a grain of salt because if there's any institution that lies through its teeth, well, here is that one. It's U.S. intelligence. But also, U.S. intelligence, when they do tell the truth, what they're usually doing is they're trying to sell a narrative. China bad. And they're usually trying to sell that narrative through the prism of, well, actually, this is a real foe. So this is why we have to take U.S. intelligence reports with various levels of scrutiny, not just rejection because they're all lies, but also what do those lies tell us about the situation the U.S. finds itself in. That is analysis. U.S. intelligence indicates that China is preparing a delivery of new air defense systems to Iran within the next few weeks, according to 3 people familiar with recent intelligence assessments. It would be a provocative move considering Beijing said it helped broker the fragile ceasefire agreement that paused the war with Iran and the United States. Donald Trump is also to visit China early next month for talks with Chinese leader Xi Jinping, which those talks are not a guarantee. Right? Just going to put that out there. The intelligence also underscores how Iran may be using the ceasefire as an opportunity to replenish weapon systems with the help of a key foreign partner. 2 of the sources told CNN there are indications Beijing is working to route the shipments to third countries to mask their true origin. The systems Beijing is preparing to transfer are shoulder-fire anti-aircraft missile systems known as MANPADS, the sources said, which pose an asymmetric threat to low-flying U.S. military aircraft throughout the course of the 5-week war and could again if the ceasefire falls apart. So, I mean, look, China has far better technology than this. Iran has already been shown to use this kind of technology. They definitely have used it during the Isfahan raid. They've used it at various times to fire on the F-15s, the F-18s that have entered its airspace. And what I believe the U.S. intelligence is actually doing is it is warning the Trump administration that an air war is only becoming more dangerous. And that if the United States doesn't pay attention to this, it could be seeing more downed aircraft in the future. And of course, it's going to throw in China because there's a big segment of the U.S. intelligence, U.S. neocon, the elites, the foreign policy elites that want to see the United States shift more toward China and away from this Iran business because the Iran business right now is creating an economic headache and it's causing a military defeat. But if you can focus on China, well, that's a long-term project and you get a lot of money siphoned into the U.S. military-industrial complex. And maybe, just maybe in your delusional mind, you'll be ready for some kind of military confrontation with China over Taiwan or elsewhere in some other theater. It's all fantasy, of course, at that level once you get there. But that is the thinking. That's the mentality. It's like someone who's addicted to drugs or some kind of substance, and they're just moving and substituting one one dopamine hit for the next, and that is what the U.S. empire is doing oftentimes now, because, and this is a big point, because it has to, not because it wants to. Right? There's a lot of talks about war of choice, and look, I believe that the United States, yes, is choosing to go to war in many instances with Iran based on the timing of this. The timing of this intervention was a disaster because there, of course, wasn't the preparation, there wasn't the strategic know-how, capabilities, organization. Look who's leading the White House. Look who's leading these war efforts. But truthfully, that was likely always going to be the case, right? Incompetence is kind of where the U.S. empire is when it doesn't have any solutions. It doesn't have any vision toward how it's going to get to the objectives that it has. But more so, okay, more so to the point is that the United States has to be in a war with Iran because if it isn't, then it's going to be at war somewhere else. And then the United States empire and Israel at its side has to ask itself, is this going to satisfy our objectives, right? Is just bombing Lebanon, which is a horrific war crime, supposedly to weaken Hezbollah, which is not doing. But is that enough for the U.S. and Israel? No. First of all, the United States doesn't really even care about Lebanon. It only lets Israel do what it does in Lebanon, the genocide there, because it wants Israel to continue to satisfy its U.S. interests in the region through the chaos, through the violence, but also through the joint efforts to subdue any alternative to U.S. hegemony. That is why with Lebanon, the catastrophe there, the atrocities are tolerated. But no other theater right now is either feasible. China and Russia, not feasible. Let's just put that out there right now. There's no military or even economic or political mechanism that the U.S. can take right now that can weaken the trajectory, not just some short term, okay, that's going to maybe put a little dent in China's trade in oil somewhere, or Russia, the Ukraine conflict kind of means it has to exert military power, maybe overextend itself. No, that's a lot of that is short-term problems because there are problems with these things. But when you stack it up with how these countries have gained in this period of U.S. imperial chaos and overreach, ultimately the scales are way more in their favor than they are not. And so ultimately, Russia and China table that. That's not happening. You go to Iran now because Iran is the only thing left. The United States has left the region a wasteland. It's trying to destroy everyone. It had to back away from Ansarallah, but Yemen is not so strategic to the United States other than what its so-called vassal state allies want from it. Saudi Arabia, the UAE. We can go on and on and on. Venezuela, even. Venezuela was a nice optical shift, and it also U.S. empire, but nonetheless, just that alone is not going to satisfy the expansionist and the desperately panicked whims of an empire in decline. So here we are with Iran. That's why we're here. We're here because the U.S. empire has said it's out of time. It's out of time. It's got to go. It's got to go, and it's got to go now. And if it doesn't go now to take out Iran, well, we've seen the results. They were right. They were right. They had no more time left because look at how this has blown back. And now look at this. All right. This is coming out across all Western mainstream media. This is the editorial board of the New York Times. Trump's war has weakened America 4 ways. All right. They list 4 ways that since February 28th, this has weakened America. The most tangible blow to the United States and the world economy, of course, is the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas flows through the strait. The second setback is to America's standing in the world militarily. This war, together with the U.S. assistance to Ukraine, Israel, and other allies, has burned through a substantial portion of the stockpile of some critical weapons, such as Tomahawk missiles and Patriot interceptors. Experts believe the Pentagon used more than 1/4 of its Tomahawk missiles just in the war against Iran. Returning the stockpile to its previous size will take years, and the U.S. will have to make tough choices about where to maintain its military strength. In the meantime, already, the Pentagon has pulled missile defenses from South Korea. The war has also revealed the U.S. military is vulnerable to new ways of warfare. America used billions of dollars worth of high-tech munitions to destroy Iran's traditional air and naval forces, while Tehran used cheap disposable drones to halt traffic through the Strait of Hormuz and hit targets in the region. The world saw how a country that spends one hundredth of what the U.S. does on its military can seek to outlast the U.S. in a conflict. It's a reminder of urgent reform to the U.S. military. So you see the prospects here. Do you see the framing here? The problem is not war. The problem is how the war is being administered, and this is why you cannot ultimately you can glean information and you can glean significance from what the New York Times is saying, what the whole establishment is saying. To be honest, this is significant that the U.S. mainstream corporate media, military industrial complex class is willing to admit these errors. It shows the U.S. empire in decay, but you cannot follow their lead when it comes to the conclusions, because the conclusion will be do war better. And that's not what we need. War better only leads to worse outcomes, actually. And that's why we have this cycle, right? We have this cycle of neoliberal, neocon, so-called strategic thinkers leading more to fanatical forces, which then fanatical ideologically, at least how they present themselves, and then they all come back to a whole, a single entity. So the war's third big cost is to America's alliances: Japan, South Korea, Australia, Canada. Most of Western Europe refuse to support the U.S. in the war, unsurprisingly, given Trump's treatment of them. So the tariffs, right? All of this. I mean, it's all coming back to bite the United States in the butt in many ways. This way of acting like you can go it alone, you are, you're friendless, you don't need allies, right? All of this so-called isolationism by the Trump administration is really just a cover for its need to expand its hubris and aggression wider and further. All right. And the fourth setback is to America's moral authority. This one is questionable. For all the flaws of this country, remains a beacon to many around the world. When posters ask people where they would move to if they could, the United States consistently is a runaway number one answer, which is interesting because new polls do show that actually people favor China in terms of its image around the world than the United States at this point. But nonetheless, America's appeal stems not only from its prosperity, but also from its freedom and democratic values. Trump has undercut those values for his entire political career, and perhaps never more than the past week when he made the odious threats to erase Iran's civilization. His Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, made a series of bloodthirsty remarks too, including a threat to offer no quarter, no mercy for our enemies. So, moral authority. Now, I have a gripe with that one because the U.S. empire is centuries old. The U.S. empire has roots not just around the world, but within its own borders that it established centuries ago, 250 plus years ago. And they're bloody, they're blood soaked, and they are actually rife with the use of certain kinds of morals, certain kinds of values, like American exceptionalism, city on a hill, the beacon of a hill, these kind of values that are being portrayed there in order to justify these horrific crimes. And that isn't to say that people in the United States, that there aren't good people, that there aren't good things that happen in the United States. Hell, the United States did take all of that blood-soaked warfare, expansionism, etc., and did build an impressive hegemon. It did become that. And there were things out of that which ultimately bore fruit for even a segment of the population, right? During that golden age that Trump talks about, he doesn't mention that part. He also doesn't mention the Cold War and the threat of the socialist countries, which required employers to give more wages and the government to give more benefits to more and more workers. I don't mention those parts, but truthfully, we have to have my analysis that you can't have a horrifically corrupt, violent system like imperialism, like capitalism, like all of this, and they can bear fruits of development, and they have. Now, that's all reversing because of the internal contradictions of the system leading to the logical conclusion. You cannot destroy your way into a number one position forever without expecting resistance, and that resistance eventually leading to a breaking point. And that's where we're coming to. We're coming to a breaking point. We're coming to a point where The United States doesn't just say it competes with China, but now when it comes to even the Iran situation, the US says that China is a game changer there because now, even if it's completely made up, the US is making up, or the US is referencing ideas and stories. And hell, if it's true, it's even worse that China can supply Iran to make a big difference on the battlefield against the United States. That is a big hit against the American exceptionalist ethos. We can go on and on and on with this, right? With the Iran situation, the Strait of Hormuz blockade. So now the Trump administration wants to blockade the Strait of Hormuz because Iran has taken control of it, and you told us that Iran is blockading the Strait of Hormuz. So if Iran's blockading the Strait of Hormuz, why would you blockade it? Doesn't that just lead to more blockading? And even Iran's foreign ministry came out with a statement saying this defies logic. Really, the only way to resolve any problems that come from what's happened to the Strait of Hormuz is to have discussions. And that's exactly what Iran invited. And Iran did those discussions, mind you, without a ceasefire taking place in Lebanon. And there's an interesting story about that because Iran was effectively told by the mediators through the United States that there would be an effective ceasefire when talks began. And guess what? There wasn't. The US lied. Shocker. This is why the talks went on the way they did. You better believe that the Iranian negotiators were at the table saying, not only how can we trust you, but how could we not demand that you now do this? We're here now. We took the trip. We almost didn't. I was informed that they were waiting for hours and hours and hours, waiting to see if they were even going to go. This is the mentality right now of Iran. It is different. It is different than what a lot of Americans and what a lot of people in the collective West are used to. Right? It is not just defiant, it is dictatorial in the way it is asserting its terms. And it's also methodical and it's impressively strategic. And so this is causing just absolute nightmares. This is creating absolute nightmares for the US, which doesn't have, I don't even like to use the word strategy with the United States empire at this point, with the way that it behaves and conducts itself based on its own desperate um, contradictions and issues. Don't even use the word, right? It's not that. The way that it behaves, not strategically, but just imbecilically, chaotically, the only goal it has in mind is to get to that point of destruction that leads it to some kind of promised land, that leads it to some kind of changed outcome that it couldn't get. What did Iran say? It tried to get in talks what it couldn't get on the battlefield. That's a strange way to approach negotiations. You usually go into negotiations because you have leverage. And what the United States would say, and what JD Vance has already said, what Trump has said, Trump just said it again. He said, "Yeah, we can wipe out Iran." He did it again. He went on Fox News and he said, "We can wipe out Iran. We can take on all of its infrastructure, all of its oil." Not mentioning that if the US does this, then what happens? Oh, well, I'll tell you what happens. The markets crash. The global economy tanks. You have a situation in the United States where gas prices are up 21% in a month. And all items, all goods are up 2, 3, 4 times what they were before February 28th. So, yeah, Donald Trump doesn't have any more targets. Scott Ritter was on the show. He said the United States doesn't have any more targets because those targets that it has, those are not only are those not military targets. Forget the technicalities after that, right? They're not military targets. You can't even count those if you're following the laws of war, but the U.S. never does. But they're not even targets in the sense that the consequences of hitting those things only falls harder at the feet of the U.S. Crushes its feet, right? Shooting yourself in the foot. No. The consequences are just going to shatter at the feet of the U.S. So this is the situation we're in, and the U.S. could very well. Honestly, this is all I view this as a restart of the war, because war doesn't always look the same all the time as it's being fought, right? You're not, in the movies we get the war scenes, right? We get the scenes of the front lines, the the battles from World War II, these kind of things. And it looks like what Ukraine became in a lot of ways, where you have two standing armies confronting each other face on. But oftentimes war doesn't look like that, and it hasn't looked like that for quite a long time. And even the Ukraine war doesn't look like that fully. And now we're seeing that the battlefield is basically resolved, even if it is in this kind of amorphous situation some would call stalemate, but really it's just Russia methodically going about its business. But there's other parts to this economic war that's been lost by the United States, the diplomatic war, the attempt to just overthrow the Russian government. It actually kind of smells a little familiar to the Iran war. It's just that the Iran war, the United States was never going to be able to organize a proxy strong enough, like it did Ukraine, to be able to confront Iran militarily on a battlefield. That's actually the biggest reason why the United States right now is where it is. Because as I've had Larry Johnson, so many people on this show explain, if the US sends ground forces into the region, then it just gets massacred, right? Then it has to face the consequences, even if it causes casualties itself, like it likely would, right? I mean, the US trains for this. The US practices the art of killing, invading, etc. But it would have to bear the consequences of Iran's response and its ability to have, as Patricia Marin said, a high morale military that's big, and you have a lot of people volunteering to join to defend the country now, meaning that this is a bad situation for the United States. And um, they don't have a force inside of the country of Iran to do its bidding and overthrow the government and fight Iran's military forces, tie them up. It doesn't have a Syria style situation. It doesn't have even a Venezuela. We have to remember that Venezuela did have a violent opposition to the government that did cause damage and that did create the conditions for what happened to Maduro eventually, right? To the kidnapping, all of this. Multiple iterations of guarimbas, as they were called, where you had right-wing fascist Venezuelan forces, and even forces from not inside of Venezuela, right, Colombians, etc., spark a kind of color revolution, quote unquote, scenario to try to destabilize the government. It didn't work. They tried Nicaragua as well, Honduras, multiple countries in Latin America. They go through this model. This is not a new model. Iran, though, has just in such shocking fashion to the US consolidated itself politically to the point where you don't have that. Sure, people have criticisms, people have opposition to the government, but you have no force in Iran that's willing to organize themselves to confront the government and military head on and replace it with something favorable to the United States. You don't have that. You don't have any iteration, but you don't have that in particular and especially. Before the war started, right, the late 2025 into the beginning months of 2026, that violent riot that was successfully put down after a lot of violence and losses, thousands of Iranians killed, that was really the nail in the coffin of this war. We have to go back to that because if it wasn't for that, Iran would have a lot more troubles to contend with. It wouldn't be able to focus so much on the external aggressors. It would have had to focus on the internal. And in truth, historically, if we look at this, the reason why the United States started implementing models like Venezuela, Nicaragua, Syria, these models of trying to internal dissension and trying to create chaos and proxies, right? The dirty wars in Latin America, all of that is because the anti-colonial, the liberation movements, the anti-imperialist movements of the 20th century, right? The whole Cold War, all of those movements were deemed as impenetrable threats, right? So think about North Korea, for example, DPRK, the Soviet Union when it was viable. Think about China now. Think about Iran now, right? These countries had movements that were viewed as impenetrable, and without a force strong enough internally to weaken their legitimacy, no outside invasion could defeat them, because an outside invasion will never, right? Will never bring about the popular will of the people to fight for you. No, no, no. You're destroying the country. This is a historic fact all throughout history. Even the French, the British, other empires had to learn this too. Is that when they tried to invade and settle, they had to deal with the people at a certain point. So it was always about either trying to, as Israel has done, try to outnumber, right? Like in Palestine, you try to outnumber, you try to spread out, you try to displace everyone, and then you basically try to eradicate, right? You try to eradicate what they did to the indigenous people, etc. Or you build up an internal force strong enough to protect the interests that you have conquered and occupied. Even Donald Trump uses the word conquer. So this is ultimately where we are. And I'm in China now, and I am going to be covering, okay? I'm going to be doing interviews. I'm going to be talking to Zhang Weiwei. I'm going to be talking to Victor Gao during this trip. I'm also going to be trying to do, today I didn't do it because I just got in and I just want to set up the internet, see if it was working. So tell me how that went. I want to see if it works, but I will be doing like more out and about where I'm out walking and talking. You can see what's going on. Where I'm staying in Beijing right now at nighttime, I don't think it would have been very pretty. So I'll have to figure that out at another point, but I will do it. And I want to see how the internet worked out in case I want to also get guests back on the show to comment on these developments. But nonetheless, I'm here now in Beijing. I mean, I can prove it to you. We got some food here. This is Hunanese food from Beijing. And you know, uh, I'm going to be reporting about China's perspective, especially too, because right now, China's being, of course, from the beginning, China's been brought in. Oh, look at the radar technology, satellite technology, and it was all very impressive, but it was all done within the auspices of general cooperation, not really a military partnership. The military part is just part of an overall economic understanding and agreement and a political one, really, because the China-Iran relationship is political, and that's what I want to talk to those who I'm going to be interviewing about is why is it so important for China and Iran to have this kind of friendship, and why does it threaten the United States so much, and what exactly is China's role? Did China strong man its ties with Iran, squeeze Iran into these talks? I don't think so, but I want to hear other perspectives about that. And so we're gonna do a lot here to talk about these things. And I get to show you China. I like to come here once a year, if not more. Hard to do that these days, but once a year to refresh that perspective, see what kind of changes are going on and how it applies to the world situation. Because right now we are in a historic one, everybody. We're in a historic one. The United States went to negotiations with Iran essentially to try to plead it to let go of its control over the Strait of Hormuz and the whole so-called nuclear question. Forget about that. Forget about it. Trump said nuclear. Forget about it. Really, it's about getting Iran to stop asserting its advantages over the United States. The same, I mean, this is what Iran said they were going into it with. They had won things, they'd achieved something, and they did. They have. They have created a system with the Strait of Hormuz that's going to essentially act as the mechanism for reparations for their country for years to come. And now the calculation is too that no matter how much the US can destroy, unless the Trump administration can figure out a way to stop Iran from gaining revenues from the Strait of Hormuz traffic, Iran is saying it can rebuild itself after the fact. And it already is. It's already rebuilding train systems. It's already rebuilding bridges, etc., that have been damaged by U.S. and Israeli strikes. So Iran is moving very fast to do this. It obviously has been preparing for this. It is under a wartime economic footing, but also it's under a footing that is prioritizing, of course, the people in a time of absolute horror, trauma, and just criminality being imposed against them of a foreign power. Iran has made all the right moves to keep itself not just legitimate, to grow that legitimacy. And the Strait of Hormuz is really where the United States empire is completely stuck. And so the U.S. empire doesn't even, you notice where Trump is going now, and this is where we will end it. Trump administration is no longer going to, let's let's go into a full war, let's do ground invasion, let's do all this, right? It was bandying about those options and talking about them for a while. It's not doing that no more. Now it's back to blockades, naval, the economic roots of the problem, because the US is seeing right before its eyes its ability to dictate terms economically wane. And what Iran has done has not just strengthened Iran, it's strengthened China, it's strengthened Russia, because if these countries begin to form a kind of new center of power around how global trade happens, which already has been happening with China. China's already been doing that just by its sheer economic weight, how it leads as a trading partner with nearly every country in the world. But and the infrastructure is top notch, the technology is top notch, and also people have benefited from it. These are all just facts. Right? Whatever you think about it, that's just the facts. But this would be even a step further, in that China often takes the view of it doesn't want to be dominating anything. Now Iran has been forced into a position where it has to dominate the Strait of Hormuz if it's going to survive. China now can say, well, Russia can say, yeah, there are plenty of areas where they could assert themselves militarily and economically to shore up their own national security at the economic level, the fundamental level of their survival. So everybody, this is a game-changing moment. The talks have collapsed. The U.S. Navy is getting ready to go into a war that will be a disaster for it. Trump is restarting this war because he has nothing else. He can't bow down to Iran's terms, which have been out there from the very beginning, right? Respect to Iran's sovereignty, stop the strikes, international guarantees that the strikes will be stopped through a UN Security Council vote, as well as a mechanism to enforce that vote. Reparations, ceasefire in Lebanon, all these terms that have been out there for months. And now the United States can't leave the room with Iran without taking those into consideration. And it ran out of the room like a tantrum, like a toddler in a tantrum. I want to thank everybody for the super chats. The main reason Trump kidnapped Maduro is to try and force him to lie and say Venezuela interfered in 2020 because he can't stand losing. That's one of the reasons. I don't know if that's the main reason. Dan the Man, thank you, buddy, for insightful geopolitical analysis and your wonderful guests these past weeks. Have a good week in China. Be safe. Yes, I'll be here for a few, actually. Great job, Danny. Thank you. Thank you for all of this. Danny Empire Relentless, as a Vietnam compatriot. Remember, this year marks 80 years. France tried to recolonize Vietnam after World War II in 1946, led to their historic defeat in Dien Bien Phu in 1954. Yes, indeed. My father was also a Vietnam vet, so he got to face the consequences of that many years later. I'm sorry, people need to stop letting Trump off the hook. It drives me nuts. He's grown up with agency. Sure, BB lied, always lies, but no. I agree with that. I mean, Trump is the president of the United States. He is a war criminal. He falls within the rest of the war criminals, and he is indeed. He believes this war is in his interest. He's not just playing. This is not just an acting role. Dear Danny, great goal is governing by tweets and seeing an aggression the solution any promise to real. Salvador Dali's on the sidelines, don't you think? Thank you so much for that comment. Has there been actually evidence that Iran is deploying any mines? Yes. The only reason there's evidence is because the IRGC is escorting tankers. And it's not just for fun. There's definitely mines there. Now, how many, how devastating, how whatever, we don't know. Right? We don't know. Do you know if Hirachi and President Ronnie are back home safe and sound? They're 26 years. I believe they are, but I think there's a lot of silence around this because there's a lot of oh, he just messaged me, so he's safe. All right, I'm gonna get with him some point soon, either by stream or pre-record. All right, everybody, hit the like button. We are done here. I got it. It's 1:30 a.m. in Beijing. I gotta go, but I'm gonna keep doing this. All right, each day I'll be doing something for all of you, and take care. All right, hit the like button as you leave. Be sure to do that because that helps. Where do we have here? Now we have 5.6 thousand likes. That's great. But hey, 12,000 of you. If you can get another 1,000, 2,000 up, that helps a lot. I saw another big super chat. No. I already reported that. All right, everybody, hit the like button. I'll be back again tomorrow. I'll let you know what time that is. Peace out.